On September 6, 2017, the day stood still. Sunny skies hovered the rugged mountain terrain encapsulated the Virgin Islands. It was a warm, beautiful day on Tortola, but in the Atlantic Ocean chaos was brewing, waves crashed violently, and winds blew at high speed. Meanwhile, all living organisms, including residents, visitors, and creatures alike scampered to prepare for weather forecasters' warnings of a monster, named Irma. Everyone stocked up on water, canned foods, and batteries. Lumber was acquired for battening windows and doors to mitigate the catastrophic onslaught predicted. The magnitude of destruction expected was unseen in the history of hurricanes on planet Earth. Irma raged through the islands with fury and disgust. Her tremendous unimaginable force destroyed every vegetation, building, and life within her path. Unrivaled by any other hurricanes making landfall in the Atlantic, she earned the many titles, Witches of Darkness, Island Smasher, Monster, and Beast. Tears flowed and knees fell to the ground in prayer, as she moved through the islands. Repeating this experience within their lifetime would be a curse from the pits of hell. The beautiful Virgin Islands, British, are located between the Caribbean Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean. It lies east of Puerto Rico and its geographic coordinates are 18 degrees 30 minutes north, 64 degrees 30 minutes west. The area totals 151 square kilometers, 0.9 times the size of Washington, D.C., and comprises 16 inhabited and more than 20 uninhabited islands. This includes the islands of Tortola, Anegada, Virgin Gorda, and Jost Van Dyke, where the population density is greatest. There are no natural bodies of water on the land surface of the island or land boundaries with other countries. There is 80 kilometers of coastline. The islands boast a tropical humid climate, with temperatures moderated by trade winds. Its terrain consists of coral islands, which is relatively flat. Its steep hilly islands are because of volcanic actions. The lowest point is the Caribbean Sea, and its highest point is Mount Sage at 521 meters, 709 feet above sea level. Its natural resources are negligible. In terms of land use, it is 20% arable land, 6.67% permanent crops and 73.33% hilly terrain. Its natural hazards consist of hurricanes and tropical storms from July to October. There are limited natural freshwater resources. Except for a few seasonal streams and springs on Tortola, most of the island's water supply comes from wells and rainwater catchments. Minutes after Sandy placed her feet on Tortola's soil for the first time at the airport, she fell in love with the natural beauty, tranquility, and idyllic feeling evoked by the environment. The Caribbean breeze filled her lungs to capacity. The air was fresh and clean. She inhaled and exhaled effortlessly. It was invigorating and subliminal. Freckled face, raspy-voiced Sandy lived on Tortola in a diverse community called Huntom's Gut, the famous Big Yard as it was otherwise called. The compound comprised of 3 apartment complexes, which was home to many ethnic groups: Jamaicans, Vincentians, Virgin Islanders, Vietnamese, Guyanese, Indians, Kititians, and Dominicans. Keeping the environment lively was the voluntary and effortless job of the Jamaicans. Loud shouts, communicating with each other. From one rooftop to another. "Hey man, batten up good, a monster coming," shouted Randy to Mavis from across the road. Cultural practices trumped societal norms on Big Yard. With plywood on his back, limping and bearing the weight like a giant, Randy marched up the many flights of stairs. He closed his door, then hammered the wood across the door, securing his structure. He was a tall, friendly, gregarious man in his mid-40s. Cheek-to-cheek smiles, vigorous waves greeted everyone he encountered. Coyote animal-like sound was his precursor to arrival. Big Yard was his oyster. Mikel the Vincentian sang loudly, while he tried to secure the windows of his vehicle with tapes, to prevent its shattering, during the hurricane. The squeaky annoying sound of tapes echoed through the air. Sammy the Virgin Islander moved around gingerly, to every apartment, smiling and making silly jokes. "Irma going give us some licks tonight," he advised. Walking proudly, feeling as though the wind and rain will be selective. He imagined it skipping his house to the neighbors, similarly as in the biblical days of old during the Passover. Blood was painted on every Israelite's doorpost and the angel of death passed. He had a split personality synonymous with schizophrenic behaviors. Some days he was unruffled, jovial, and energetic; other days, he was angry and obnoxious. Those who blocked his vehicle got the wrath of his tongue through verbiage not fit for airplay. Tinko, Cho, Mesa, and Rick, all Vietnamese, gathered on their red mat the night before Hurricane Irma's arrival. A circle was formed in the center of the driveway, one candle placed in the middle of the human circle. Heads bowed low, while in the Sukhasana yoga or cross-legged sitting position. The rhythmic movements of their hips looked methodical and synergistic. Speaking in their native language, they chanted and lifted their heads towards the sky. They honored the light of the moon, circled the candle for a smooth encounter during the passing of Irma. This is an interesting insight and observation depicted from the Asian culture, Sandy marveled, as she watched from her porch. After a brief research, Sandy gained an insight into the Asian culture. Vietnamese venerate their ancestors. Most families today have an ancestral altar placed in a prominent place within the house. It is set with ancestral tablets and pictures, with an incense burner bowl in the center as a symbol of the stars. Inside the bowl usually stands a circular incense stick representing the universe. 2 candles are placed on the sides of the altar to embody the sun, left, and the moon, right. On special occasions such as ancestors' death anniversaries or the Lunar New Year, special rites are performed to communicate with the dead. These consist of making offerings of fruits, foods, and wine. They lighted the candles and burned incense before kneeling and lifting their hands to the sky, in front of the altar. The group continued their ritual way into the night. Sandy felt intrusive and somehow invasive of their cultural practices and decided to remain indoors, while she continued to observe their movements. While the Asians engrossed in their ritual, Indian ladies passed. After a brief research, Sandy gained an insight into the Asian culture. Vietnamese venerate their ancestors. Most families today have an ancestral altar placed in a prominent place within the house. It is set with ancestral tablets and pictures, with an incense burner bowl in the center as a symbol of the stars. Inside the bowl usually stands a circular incense stick representing the universe. 2 candles are placed on the sides of the altar to embody the sun, left, and the moon, right. On special occasions such as ancestors' death anniversaries or the Lunar New Year, special rites are performed to communicate with the dead. These consist of making offerings of fruits, foods, and wine. They lighted the candles and burned incense before kneeling and lifting their hands to the sky, in front of the altar. The group continued their ritual way into the night. Sandy felt intrusive and somehow invasive of their cultural practices and decided to remain indoors, while she continued to observe their movements. While the Asians engrossed in their ritual, Indian ladies passed in their colorful sherry, radiating a burst of colors depicting the rainbow. Joined by their male counterparts, and speaking in their native language, lips movements seemed to be saying "I love you." Admiration was in their eyes. Their garments swayed in the wind as it was loosely wrapped around the waist, with one end draped the shoulder bearing the midriff. This was a symbol of style, grace, and cultural pride. A prominent bindi or red dot in the middle of their forehead between the eyebrows worn at different stages of their lives, signifying true love and prosperity in marriage. Men wore a tilak during pujas, prayers, or religious ceremonies in India. In a spiritual view, bindi plays the most important role in Hindu culture. Every morning a Hindu takes a bath and sit in prayer, to seek the absolute truth through prayer. Upon leaving the prayer room, they are expected to place a mark of their choice, usually circular, on their forehead. Throughout the day, they are reminded about all the activities and purpose in life. Seeing this mark on others, reminded everyone of the dedicated activities towards achievement of this supreme goal of self-realization. There was never a dull moment on Big Yard. Some pleasant, others interesting, and disturbing. Odors of every kind permeated the air: marijuana, cigarette, alcohol, ethnic foods to the extreme pungent sewage and garbage. Every genre of music echoed from Sandy's living room: Asian, Spanish, Indian, gospel, reggae, and calypso. A fusion of culture. While everyone was indulging in life's activities, Irma was gaining force and momentum across the ocean. She was destined to either pass over or make landfall on the beautiful archipelago of the Virgin Islands. Kititians and Guyanese nationals cleaned and cooked. Curry fragrance from pots could be inhaled from miles away. Cooks stimulated the neighborhood's hunger from food fragrance, intoxication, imagination, and salivation. Big Yard dwellers from the nature islands of Dominica epitomized modesty. Their language was not calumniated as they represented well the organic blend of food, water, and vegetation of their homeland. Sandy's stomach churned all day from the curry and turmeric mist passing through her nostrils and was high from the marijuana smoke emitted in the atmosphere. She took one last view from her porch, sighed heavily, entered her living room and turned the top lock. Securing the windows with built-in hurricane shutters was her next move. She announced loudly to her roommate, "David, time to lock up." Pulling and closing the shutters was much harder than she anticipated. The struggle was real. The shutter's corroded wheels squeaked due to infrequent usage. Accessing the lock was possible from the outside via a key which was not available. Although the landlord visited earlier in the day and offered to close the shutters, he left without its completion. He debranched the mango tree and totally removed an overhanging coconut tree from the house. She had refused his offer, knowing the combined effort of two men was enough help to get the job done. After doing their best, they retired to the living room, exhausted. The universe allowed their paths to cross during one of Sandy's visit to the immigration department. While seated, she spotted a tall, well-dressed, expressionless face man collecting a number to be served by an immigration officer. Subconsciously, flashes of him spiraled through her mind as though living in the past. She waited for her brain to be recharged and her memory jolted. Minutes later, their eyes met, she smiled involuntarily. Faint memories trickled through her mind, and while shaking her index finger and nodding her head simultaneously, David sauntered beside her. Immediately, they began to talk, each uttering the same words, "I know you." After processing their documents, on the outside, they exchanged telephone numbers. Several weeks passed, and Sandy had no communication from David. She decided to visit him at his workplace. David smiled as though experiencing the eureka moment as she walked through the door. The feeling was reciprocated. They chatted for a while. He had misplaced the number and was unable to contact her. Their meeting blossomed into a great platonic friendship and roommates. He visited Sandy on his days off from work, usually on a Sunday. 1 month later, after being evicted from a couple's living room where he was temporarily housed, he moved into the vacant room of Sandy's apartment. He promised to pay his half of the rent and bills monthly. While sitting on separate sofas, in their living room, Sandy and David's eyes pierced on the Weather Channel, listening intently as the meteorologist iterated the news of an impending Category 5 hurricane. Their hearts began pounding. Boom. 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 Rhetorical questions flashed through her head. Will we survive this monstrous hurricane? Will this house withstand the wind? Horrendous descriptions such as, "mother of all hurricanes," with band covering the entire island intensified the fear. Sandy asked herself, was this a disaster waiting to happen? Will the national prayer vigil called by the premier and leader of government help to divert and dissipate it into the atmosphere? Although seated on comfortable sofas, her buttocks ached as though sitting on cushions with pins and needles. Disguising the nervousness was impossible as one leg dangled with agitated movements from side to side. While keeping an eye outside, as though wearing a Captain Morgan's eye patch, and then nudged by nature's intuition inside her gut, she raised her gaze to the porch. Sandy's small red car, on loan to her friend Vic, passed. Stopping by to check on her safety vividly surfaced to her mind, but the car continued and passed her yard, going further and further away. Quickly, she picked up her mobile phone, dialed his number, but there was no response. The wind's blustery hiss passed through the phone. Her heart dropped. The urgency of the hurricane preparation took precedence. She quickly pushed all emotional thoughts into subliminal mode. Irma's threats were too important to dwell on such trivial matters. She maintained her composure and continued her preparation. From miles away, bangs from hammers echoed through the air, as residents in the community battened roofs, doors, and windows. Fright and anxiety propelled the preparation, which continued in earnest throughout the day. Men made several trips with plywood and cases of water on their heads and hammered for hours. Like a sharp, jagged scissors, chainsaws ripped through the trees near and far. While the activities gained momentum, the feral kept quiet, as they too prepared their nest and hid. The consistent crowing sound of the rooster was noticeably absent. During the quiet moments, she checked her mobile phone for updates on the hurricane from the Department of Disaster Management, DDM, the territory's governing authority on disasters. She read all the messages from 2 days prior. The team consistently kept residents up to date on the location, speed, and intensity of the hurricane. This was information for action. Messages sent by text from communication networks, Lime, Digicel, and Caribbean Cellular Telephone, CCT, streamed without delays. While she read the first message, Hurricane Irma continues to strengthen as it approaches the Leewards and Virgin Islands, an overwhelming pressure built up in her head like sardines in a compressed can. Opening the next text simultaneously, which read, in its 8 p.m. advisory on September 4, 2017, the National Hurricane Center said data from an Air Force Reserve Hurricane Hunter aircraft indicate that the maximum winds have increased. Winds are moving near 140 miles per hour, mph, with higher gusts. Additional strengthening is forecasted during the next 48 hours. Hurricane force winds extend outward up to 40 miles from the center and tropical storm force winds extend outward up to 140 miles. At 8 p.m. on September 5, 2017, Irma was located near latitude 16.7 degrees north, longitude 55 degrees west. The Category 4 hurricane is moving toward the west near 13 miles per hour. General motion is expected to continue into Tuesday, followed by a turn toward the west-northwest late Tuesday. On the forecast track, the center of Irma will move approximately 35 miles northeast of the British Virgin Islands on Wednesday. The latest minimum central pressure reported by reconnaissance aircraft is 943 millibars, which is equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane. Credit, Nationwide Newsnet, September 9, 2017. Credit, Air Force One. Probable impacts for road town winds 80 to 110 miles per hour is possible in some locations. Higher gusts at elevated areas expected on the northern coast of Tortola as well as the northern islands including Anegada. Rainfall amounts of 8 to 14 inches are likely, and this would likely cause street flooding and travel delays. Mudslides are possible in the mountainous areas. Storm surge with the track north of the British Virgin Islands, a storm surge of up to 6 to 8 feet will be possible on Tortola. Increases expected up 10 to 14 feet for the northern islands including Anegada. This would result in damage to coastal structures. At 2 p.m. on September 6, 2017, the local disaster management system released another message via all the local telephone network including CCT on cell phones, radio, and television. The message was clear and concise. Residents must remain inside. Road town will be hit now with an 85 to 140 miles per hour winds, gusts, and storm surge. Irma was now a Category 5 hurricane. Be prepared to be safe was the message succinctly. Sandy coalesced all the messages in her head. After reading the advisory, she looked towards the kitchen where David traipsed in circles and shouted frantically to him, "DDM says prepare for the worst now." Looking through the windows, tall coconut trees leaned back and forth. They watched as one leaf hit the ground followed by another bang as it landed on a parked vehicle's bonnet. Motionless, she froze, stared in dismay, then whispered in her mind, "Please Lord, help us today, I pray." By the minute then second, the intensity of the wind increased like watching sand passing through an accelerated hourglass. Clearly and evidently, Hurricane Irma had arrived on the island one day earlier than forecasted. As they looked to the left, the top of the adjacent three-story building was gone. Guyanese and Vietnamese nationals ran through the wind and rain for shelter. Some had bags, others small suitcases in their hands. The building housed many. 24 persons tried to escape. Aluminium zinc sheet covering from rooftops, shoes, laundry baskets, clothes, and everything inside the house moved in a tornado-style motion through the sky. Loud pounding echoed as the objects landed on top of Sandy and David's roof like the firing of multiple gunshots from an assault rifle. The roof pounded loudly. With every pounding sound, Sandy ducked her head as though she was hypnotized. David escaped to his room and closed his door. Meanwhile, Sandy continued to observe her surroundings. As she looked to the right, the wind was destroying the top floor of yet another apartment building, peeling off the zinc. Then rafters followed. Homes hurtled through the wind like a giant whirlpool. Bright blue skies was transformed to gloomy, foggy, dark clouds. Similarly, to the house on the left, the top floor collapsed. Wet, scared Santo Dominicans, Virgin Islanders, Jamaicans, and Kititians ran out of the demolished building for their lives. They hustled to the nearest emergency shelter. Occupying center position in the yard, Sandy's house was protected from the elements, but after the devastating collapse of both apartments on either side, the wind had free rein to maneuver. Positional cushion was all gone in the wind. The nakedness was evident. The front door began to rattle. Sandy's heart was pounding. She hurried to her bedroom for the keys, nervously smashing her vase to pieces, while trying to grasp the keys without stumbling. Her mind and body were imbalanced emotionally and physically. Success was hers as she managed to place the key in the door's lock. The door and lock shook violently as it was no match for the wind force of Hurricane Irma. Sandy shouted to David, "Let us hold the door." Using all their hands, they held onto the door for 1 minute, pushing as hard as they could. Trying to fight Mother Nature was an irrational behavior. The trajectory of the wind speed was with such gravitational force, it shattered the bolts. Sandy's body lifted with the door. "Oh my God," she cried, and simultaneously, they both let go of the door. It blew through the sky like a rocket launched by NASA. A quick retreat was made to their bedroom closets. Where was Vic in her time of need? Aluminium zinc covering the roof began to lift as the wind pounded. One by one, from the living room and kitchen areas they peeled. A loud crash rippled through her eardrums from inside her closet, where she hid. Bang! 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 The crashing object pelted through the roof of the kitchen. A bomb from Hurricane Irma had fallen into the house. Insane thoughts rushed through her mind. The wind sang hoo-ha. And with every hoo-ha, there was a loud crash. The chandelier, dishes, wine glasses, decorations all crashed to the ground with glass dispersing everywhere. Everything was being destroyed. The sound was deafening and horrifying. The torments of hell bombarded her spirits. She screamed loudly, all inside her gut. With a downtrodden spirit, peeping through her door she saw one door of the refrigerator flying through the open sky. The roof was gone. Amazement, sadness, bewilderment all described her emotions. Feeling the urgency to call on the Creator, Sandy closed her eyes and whispered her prayers. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie in green pastures, he leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul, he leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies, thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen." Psalm 23 verse 1-6, NKJV. While she prayed, the wind and rain continued for hours and began to lift open the shutters from the windows in the bedroom. Objects hurled from every direction. She decided to protect her bedroom by pushing back the shutters. Each time she pushed, a large gust of wind and rain dashed leaves in her face and eyes. Yet, she persisted in closing the shutters, hoping the roof would remain intact. This was her idea of persistence and perseverance through God's help to save her life. Faith without works is dead, according to the scriptures written by the Apostle James, whom Jesus selected to bear witness to his transfiguration. Sandy worked for hours. Water dripped from her soaking wet clothes. The bedroom's roof began to crumble, threatening to crash upon her head. Through her jarred door, she peeped to see how David was coping as his room was straight across, divided by a narrow passage. "David, are you alive?" Sandy asked in a quavering voice. Trying to hold his voice steadily, he replied, "We are going to die in here today. You better prepare your soul." For hours the wind battered the house. Irma dumped hundreds of liters of water through the open windows and roof in the living room and kitchen. Water flowed like an open pipe throughout the house. Meanwhile, David was standing on his bed, singing and beating his tambourine, trying to invite God's presence into the house. While he continued, the deafening sound of the wind roared like a lion in the jungle of Africa. Bodily fatigue, pain, and gratification for being alive flooded her body within half of a second. Suddenly, there was calm. Relieved by the lull of the moment, she sighed heavily. The hurricane's tortuous spell was not over. The quiet, peaceful atmosphere was abrupt. Stepping on tipped toes like walking on eggshells, they both crawled from their hiding places to assess the damage. Sandy picked up a television belonging to her friend Sarah from the ground. Internet box, scattered vitamins, a shoe belonging to someone else, broken door, glass particles, all scattered in the water and stockpiled throughout the house. Everything was in a total mess. While trying to salvage the broken pieces of her shattered life tossed 1,000 feet from the highest point on Mount Everest, the wind howled. With fury, greater speed, power, and gust, displaying its authority once again. Sandy dropped the pot, which fell on her toes, and grabbed the television set. Adrenaline rush pushed her behind the closet in seconds. David shouted in a frail, frightened voice, "Leave those material things alone, and worry about your soul? He too ran to his room to escape the rain, wind, and swirling movement of objects. Irma was not over. The tale was passing. Wind sound was deafening. Sandy's hearing was gone. She squeezed her ears several times and could not hear a sound. The decibel levels from the hurricane ruptured her eardrums. I am deaf, she murmured to herself. Oh, my lord, I cry to thee, she said silently in her heart. As she curled up under the closet, she could hear huff, huff, huff. The wind roared ferociously like a wild beast. The roof of the bedroom was now taking the onslaught of the winds and rain. Slowly, piece by piece, the roof went with the wind, making a landing with loud crashes anywhere the trajectory ended. Night was upon the territory. An apprehensive feeling was a mild description of her disposition. The feeling was surreal. Sandy's head pounded, her heart raced, and nothing could stop the feeling of devastation thrusted upon her. Then, after several hours of ordeal, there was a calm. David reappeared from his hiding place and said, "We cannot stay here, and I am not leaving you either." Sandy blindly held on to objects. She touched the walls with her fingers, to find her way. She moved with caution slowly, as she exited the house. Her stomach ached. Instinctively, she knew the wrong decision was made to leave. This was an irrational counterintuitive reaction. Her knees wobbled, and heart was still pounding heavily as though it wanted to burst through her chest. David was in a haste to flee the house and find an emergency shelter. While Sandy scrambled in the dark, trying to keep up, she tripped on her face on a downed electrical wire. Her ankles began to hurt. She pulled herself from the puddle of water. The numbness and lifelessness in her legs restricted her movements. The pain was excruciating. She now confirmed in her mind the decision to leave the house was a mistake, although it could no longer provide protection from the elements of the weather. After painfully dragging her legs through more water and rubble, the rain started to pour with great intensity again. Sandy was soaked from head to toe. With fear, anxiety, and misery in her heart and soul, she decided to return to the demolished house for the night. By this time, David was a far distance away, oblivious to her situation. In its worsened state, the house was a far better option than being trapped in the dark, cold open sky at night. Sandy spoke loudly, "Lord, why have you forsaken me?" Streaming through her head like a mighty gust of wind. What a nightmare, will it ever end? She climbed up the stairs, which was blocked by a metallic garbage dumpster thrown 4 feet on her steps. Bending and crawling in the corners, Sandy made her way to her roofless bedroom. She had gained much appreciation for the house with all its ruins. It was her refuge. The night was dark, water rose to her ankles. Scattered bottles throughout the house affected her gait. Stumbling, she held onto her bed. Sandy lay on the wet bed, and as she looked up at the dark clouds and stars, she pondered. She admired the Seven Sisters star as clear as a full moon at the famous Bomba Shack in Carrot Bay, Tortola. Feeling homeless, she empathized and reflected on others, who unfortunately, found themselves in a similar predicament. She began to shiver. Her extremely restless legs, frigid lifeless body laid on the soaking wet mattress. Needing a dry spot to sleep, she rolled off the bed, grabbed the large plastic trash bag, filled with Red Cross donation clothing from under her closet. She emptied the contents on the driest side of the bed, then curled her body onto the padding. The cold blistering wind and rain wreaked havoc on her fragile mind and body. Not even an iota of sleep was achieved, as she continuously pierced her eyes on the dark skies overhead. This was one of the longest nights she had experienced in her years of existence.